Great, we'll get started then. Once again, thank you for joining. I hope everyone is well, keeping safe and healthy. This is actually our fourth webinar around COVID-19 and our human impact tracker solution. In our past webinars, we've covered the impact of COVID-19 on sort of people's mood, as well as some of their sort of more general behaviors. And we've also sort of touched a bit on how a brand should sort of be communicating more generally at this time. We've also sort of looked at new routines that have sort of resulted from the outbreak. And in fact, just yesterday, we talked about the impact on personal care and hygiene routines. So understanding more around hand washing, showering behaviors, but also around the products and changing brands people are using. Today, the focus really is on food and exactly how COVID-19 is influencing not just purchasing of food, but also consumption of food. So we're going to start a bit more broad and then really dive into the food category. In fact, every week we will be diving into different sectors and categories. So please do send us a message with your email address if you would like to know about the ones we have coming up in the future. I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Vidisha. Some of you may have met me or come across me in some earlier webinars, but my role is sort of head of the research and strategy team, and I've been involved in the human impact tracker since the start, working closely with the team to design and sort of deliver it. Sort of co-presenting with me today is Brian, who's one of our global strategy directors. He works very closely with our food and beverage clients. I'll let Brian in to say hello.
Hello, everybody.
Great. So just a few housekeeping things first. You'll see that there is a function to ask questions or leave comments. Please do post questions as we go through. We won't have time to go through all of them, but if we're not able to answer your questions today, we will make sure to get back to you. Again, please bear with us if there is a problem with any technology. You know, we're still, you know, we've been working remotely for some time now, but still there can be glitches. So just bear with us, and if something does go wrong, we'll try and resolve it as quickly as possible. We can also always share the webinar recording afterwards. If some of your colleagues weren't able to join, then you know you can pass it on to them. We will be going through our dashboard. So what I would recommend is that you use full screen and sort of zoom in for the best quality, so you can see the charts and the data points we're going through today as we go through them. Great. So I'm going to start on our sort of landing page, which is this world map you see. I'm sure some of you have come across it before as well. This is essentially showing the mood or the emotional state in the different markets, in our core 10 markets we're covering. And it really helps us understand, where the country is in its stage. So not just in terms of where it is in the COVID sort of pandemic stage, but also in terms of where it is emotionally and from a human perspective. So what you see here is the top mood breakdown. That's globally. So you can see that, you know, the mood impact is largely anxiety. But what you can also see in the different countries, the different color coding represents the top sort of mood the top mood influence, I should say, in each of the countries. So how the virus is impacting mood. So we can see in the US that there's high levels of anxiety and stress, similar to UK as well. We know there that, you know, the lockdowns here continue, and the cases are still on the rise. We then look at somewhere like India, and we actually see it's still a negative mood, but it's a bit different. Here we see that people are scared and paranoid. Interestingly, when we've dived into the data, we see that there is a higher sort of concern around germs in India. which also leads them to sort of showering and bathing more. So it's not just now around, hand washing. They're actually, it is actually influencing other behaviors. So this mood is really quite important. Even the differences in the negativity in the mood is really important. In fact, Germany is a one where we're still seeing an overall positive view, despite the situation actually getting worse. So I think here we see a reflection on how the market is sort of handling it, and how the communication has been in the market, both from like healthcare side, but also from the country's government. And then we have China. China is a country where we're sort of taking a lot of learnings from, and looking to in terms of understanding what we can expect. China's sort of gone through the worst of it so far, and therefore it's sort of coming out again as a bit more positive. The outlook there is a bit more positive as people are sort of seeing the light now. Great. So interesting we should look at actually is we've looked at the emotions now. Let's look at the fear. So, we've asked people how afraid they are on a scale about the coronavirus. And what we see is that if we look at it week on week, we're actually seeing increasing levels of fear we talked about Germany, where we have seen the virus escalate. Also in India, and also in sort of UK and US, we're seeing sort of quite a big jump in fear levels. While in markets that are a bit more stabilized, like China and South Korea, we are starting to see fear levels dropping. The reason we're sort of mentioning this is that we are seeing a direct link between fear and how it impacts on their behaviors, particularly in terms of their food and consumption behaviors. And Brian, do you want to sort of talk us through that in a bit more detail now?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things that we've been tracking as we've gone through this is the correlation between how individuals are feeling, how markets are feeling, and therefore what they're purchasing. And it's a real opportunity to understand why people are behaving in the way they do. And also, as Vidisha mentioned, looking to markets like China to understand where a market that's further ahead in the pandemic and is feeling more positive, what are some of the behaviors and some of the categories that are purchasing they're going to stick. So we're going to take a look from the fear index and move to what we call the category purchase index. And this again is similar to how the fear index is calculated. It shows the percentage increase in purchase minus the percentage decrease in purchase. And it's important to say at this point that we're not capturing actual volume here. Rather, what we're capturing is the change in consumer demand relative to other categories. So really quickly, if you look to the left of the chart, you can see that globally, which is the yellow bars, people are purchasing more personal hygiene and cleaning products, followed then by long-lasting groceries and fresh groceries. And if we look all the way to the right then at the categories that people are buying less of, we see clothing, beauty and electronics, which are all a lot more discretionary purchases and are a lot more sensitive to the economic impact of the pandemic that we're seeing, where people are losing their jobs, have been furloughed, for instance, in the UK. So people are spending what they have on food and personal hygiene, cleaning, and then leaving to discretionary spend at the moment. We also have here different countries. So in red, you'll see China, and in blue, you'll see the UK. So it's really interesting to see how the level of fear, and as Vidisha mentioned, the UK is feeling on quite an anxious, stressed moment. So people are kind of stocking up mostly on food items. So in the UK, we see an over-index, especially in long-lasting groceries. And that's something we've all seen over the past few weeks on supermarket shelves, as people increasing how often they purchase things like tin soup and vegetable, and shelves then been empty of that. When we look to China, which is in a more positive mood, we see the first indications of some of the behaviours that we might see in the UK in a few weeks' time. So categories in China that are over-indexing versus the rest of the world are personal hygiene. So as Vidisha kind of mentioned yesterday, people are cleaning more, they're paying more attention to washing themselves and maintaining cleanliness. And then we're also seeing cleaning and home care products being really, really important as people are much more aware of germs and the potential implications of those germs on their health. The other thing we see in China that's, again, interesting for the UK is as the lockdown eases, people begin to buy more fresh groceries rather than focusing on long-lasting dry goods as well. So some really interesting indications. And what we want to do from there is kind of dive further into the food purchase index and understand what that means for our categories. So again, what we're seeing here is two bars. The first is since we've been charting data. So this data commences about mid-January, I believe, and then the latest week, which is, or 2 weeks ago, 22nd to 28th of March. And what we see is an increase really in fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, and seeing fresh food making a comeback. This is primarily driven by China as week and week they come out of the lockdown, and we know that Wuhan ended its lockdown yesterday as well. However, what we do see is rice, pasta, noodles, lots of dry goods in there. And when we aggregate those dry goods into a single category, that's where we get our long-lasting groceries. So it may seem surprising versus the previous graph, but when we aggregate those different categories together, we see that that the long-lasting groceries is higher than for fresh. And looking at the week on week, we can see what categories are increasing. And obviously, as the pandemic spreads across the world and is hitting the US, we're seeing a significant increase week on week across all food items as people across the world continue to stockpile or begin to stockpile in the likes of the US. So this is something we expect to see to continue for a while, but as mentioned previously, as people begin to transition out of the isolation and social distancing phase, we'll see different categories begin to increase, and even within food, different categories increase as well. So if that's the what is going on in the categories, it's really important to understand the why behind it. And so I'm going to hand over to Vidisha to look at some of those reasons.
Great, thanks, Brian. It's really interesting to see that, you know, we've seen a lot of stockpiling in dried, but that fresh is also making a comeback. Let's sort of dive into a bit more in the food space, understanding, you know, what people are thinking and how they are viewing their habits to change. I'm going to take UK as an example right now, and sort of again comparing to the last sort of couple of weeks. What we're seeing is from sort of since we started collecting the data versus more recently, is that the percentage of people who are claiming that their eating habits are changing is increasing. So around 1 in 2 are now sort of saying that the pandemic is actually changing their eating habits. Quite obviously, you know, we see that the lockdown is sort of stopping people from going to restaurants and eating out. But what we're actually also seeing is that people are saying that they're starting to eat more healthily. In fact, they're cooking more at home. They are also doing, and this is quite an interesting one, and it's quite big in the UK, it's portion control and rationing, more fruits and vegetables. These are sort of the key areas that people are sort of claiming that they're sort of changing in their behaviours. And we also saw some of this, particularly around fruit and veg, reflected in the data that Brian took us through as well. We actually, if you sort of look at some of the quotes as well around eating habits, we see that people are saying that they're making switches towards actually, you know, towards sort of healthier foods as well. You know, this person's saying they're having more less takeaway, whereas this person is saying that they're too stressed to eat, but they're eating soup. Families eating more couscous, actually because they can't even get rice or pasta, and they're also moving more towards fresh vegetables so they can have like healthier diets even after the isolation or sort of self-isolation and lockdown stage is over. So that could actually be something we may see people shifting towards as sort of the lockdown eases and the pandemic starts to pass. This is, as mentioned, this is sort of based on claimed behaviour, but what we actually also collect is in the moment behaviour. So this is behaviour and data that people are actually sort of capturing in the moment and while they're eating and drinking. So again, let's focus on the UK, where we saw this sort of shift towards people saying they are eating more healthily. But what we're seeing now is what they're actually eating. If you can see this list, what you're seeing is sort of more snack-based items, and we're also seeing more comfort foods coming through. So the cereal, sort of chocolate sweets, just chocolate-based snacks, sandwiches and bagels, other sort of carbs, biscuits, candy. So we are seeing more of comfort food and sort of snack-based food. What we also ask people is the reason they chose this food right now. And interestingly, despite the fact that people are spending more time at home, and a lot of people do even have more time on their hands, we still see speed and ease as the key drivers of choice. Healthy is actually further down. And when we think about all of the data we have collected, even historically, pre-COVID, normally speed and ease are factors around convenience that are actually tend to be linked to more negative moods. It's not always based on time that people are looking for speed and ease. It's not about always being busy or not having enough time on their hands, or coming back late from work. Often we see convenience linked with this need for something quick and requiring less effort. And so therefore, when we look at sort of people also talking about behavior change in the moment, this is a similar question, but we're asking them here in the moment, are you doing anything differently right now or today based on what you might have done prior to the pandemic? And, again, we see actually portion control and rationing coming up. People are worried about food running out. They can't even get, people can't get online delivery slots for their shopping. And you can see this reflected perfectly in this quote here. This person in the UK saying they can't get groceries because all their slots are booked up. So they're being very careful with the amounts of food they're consuming. But what we also see is people talking about less variety and what is available. We even see people talking about more junk food over eating stuff that's more healthy. So there is a real tension, like we see coming through here, that for consumers where, they're trying to or aspiring to sort of be more healthy, eat more healthily because they want to boost their immunity. But actually, in reality, we see that their emotional state and actually, and not just their emotional state, but sort of concerns around what's going on in around them leads to sort of less healthy decisions. Brian, do you sort of want to build on that a bit more?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because there's a lot of doom and gloom at the moment, particularly in the media, what people are consuming. And there's been a lot of cancellation of events and holidays and things that people normally like to do. And so whilst people might say that they're going to be eating healthily forever or doing that at home, what we're actually seeing in our in the moment data is people's way of dealing with these negative emotions is the same it's always been, and they take comfort and solace in food. So if we scroll down, Vidisha, to the mood section, one of the things we're seeing is that boredom, sadness, and particularly even in the UK, people are feeling more tired and exhausted, especially as the weeks progress, and they become a little bit tired maybe of working from home or having their normal routines being completely impacted. And it's these emotions that are actually driving the ease and convenience that Vidisha mentioned. So the restrictions on our movement, the fact that we're in lockdown, the fact we can't necessarily go where we want to go or eat what we want to eat, means that people are making kind of easier, faster choices that a lot of the time tend to be a little bit unhealthy and are kind of designed in a way to cheer them up. So turning to confectionery, turning to simple snacks that are easy to grab and eat. And so what we've seen in the last 2 weeks actually is that the amount of people eating more junk food has doubled. So whilst people have gone into this with, maybe the best of intentions, and especially around healthy eating, what we're seeing in our in the moment consumption is actually quite a bit different. Now, we do know that part of this problem is potentially the availability of healthier food. and that when people went and did their initial stock up shops, what was actually left for them was some unhealthier snacks. So it's something that we're really interested to monitor, particularly as the situation continues in the UK with regards to lockdown. So are we going to find, as the supermarkets become a little bit more well stocked, are we going to see people revert to kind of a healthy default? Or are we going to see this continued behaviour where people are actually comfort eating in a way because of its ease and convenience and how they're feeling? And I think it's really important, especially for many of you in the line, like what can your company do about this, or what can your brand do? It can be quite easily to feel quite powerless, and it holds true that you should be doing something about it. So we've been asking our consumers, and Felicia, if you'd like to scroll up for me, please. We've been asking consumers what would they like to hear from food brands during the coronavirus outbreak. And I should caveat this section with that brands and companies need to tread very carefully when it comes to communications. There's no doubt it's very important at this time to keep your brand front of mind. But when we're dealing directly with referencing COVID-19 and the coronavirus with consumers, almost 30% of people, I think it's 26, Felicia, if you want to hover over the first selection, is that people don't necessarily think this messaging is relevant. But actually, in reality, the majority of people do want to know something about what your brand is doing or what your brand is that's particularly relevant to the moment. So if you are to communicate around coronavirus and COVID-19, consumers want to be reassured and informed, and you should be leveraging specific insights with the right tone that are relevant to food in question. So what's really important, as you'll see, is consumers are worried about food hygiene and safety. And when we looked at some of the verbatims, people are looking to know what ingredients, where it's been made, and where has it been. So the comment section on the right, people are actually thinking about the food supply chain, and how is their food being touched, how has it been packaged, what are the regulations around cleanliness in factories. Things that people took for granted before the coronavirus have suddenly moved up in terms of what people want to hear about. What's potentially a little more interesting, though, is that consumers are very interested in it's the third most selected. They're interested in ingredients and products that are going to boost their health and immunity. And this is something that we feel is really interesting for brands at the moment. So people are looking to be healthier. So even if we're not seeing that necessarily come across in what they're eating at the moment, consumers do want to know about the healthier parts of your portfolio, how it can help them live slightly healthier lives. So all these things are really, really important for consumers. But again, we need to tread carefully when we think about brands in this space. And there's implications across the board for your distribution, for innovation pipelines, for promotions going forward, and what consumers will be looking for. So kind of to think about what this broadly means for everyone, I think we think it's wrong to say that everything is going to change beyond recognition. We don't think we're going to come out of the coronavirus with a completely different set of habits and behaviours, but certainly the emphasis from consumers will change, and trends that have been nascent could well accelerate coming out of it. So online shopping is one that we're seeing. More healthy foods, products that help with immunity and health will all come out of it with kind of vastly increased awareness from consumers. So what does that mean? It means that potentially you need to be looking at your innovation pipelines. Does it mean looking at CapEx longer term at factories for lines that are producing certain types of products? Do we need to adapt innovation pipelines so that vitamins, supplements, products that boost the immune system should all be given priority ahead of maybe we were? If they were in the 5-year pipeline, maybe they should come down to a 2 or 3 year pipeline, or even sooner if possible. And then finally, I think it's worth saying there's been a number of missteps by brands around messaging around coronavirus, and it's very easy for consumers to think that you're actually taking advantage of the situation. So all your communications should be as genuine as possible and authentic, and in line with what the brand believes, rather than trying to make the brand stand for something else at this point in time. I think we might pause there. We've had a few questions come in, Felicia, that we might take now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just we've got two. So one is how does sort of food delivery, how are food delivery services, sorry, mentioned in this context? I guess in terms of delivery, what we actually see is we did see a decline in delivery services when we're talking about sort of takeaway food from restaurants or other delivery providers. We actually see it as part of in our activity index, and this is largely due to the hygiene side. And it's not just due to availability. We know that, you know, at the start there was a bit of a surge in takeaways, but now there is concern around hygiene and from throughout, not just hygiene in the sort of preparation space, but in the entire production, from the entire production process. So we did actually see food delivery services taking a little bit of a hit in some of these markets where people want to have a bit more control around the hygiene standards, and therefore they can control food that's cooked in their own kitchens versus outside. From a sort of grocery perspective, actually, I think we do actually have a category for online delivery, for food and beverage delivery. So that category would dive more into specific delivery providers, which actually responds to a second question around delivery we had, which was, do we have any insight on which delivery providers, whether they're aggregators or restaurant brands, are getting it right? I think that would definitely, we could probably find some nuggets in the food data, but I think that would be definitely something we would have a lot more depth in our online delivery category, which we can provide more information on after this session.
I think there's a couple more, Venetia, that I'll take. I think the first one was a question around Germany's positive feeling and why Germany as a country is feeling more positive despite a jump in the fear index. I think that, you know, something that we do quite a lot of is a lot of research around what's going on, and what we see in Germany is compared to the rest of Europe is a very well managed government plan and reaction to COVID-19, where people are very well informed, where the health system is able to manage the outbreak and the amount of people that are seen with the disease, and they have more cases but are testing more, but they have less deaths. And that's something that we are linking to that more positive feeling, where they feel that the pandemic is actually under control and not running away. So as a country, Germany is feeling very different because how they're behaving is quite different. I think the second one, Venetia, you might need to help me with, which is, you know, how does what we're seeing in the purchase index compare to normal circumstances?
I think that's a good question. Was it specific to the food purchase index or just generally?
I think it was just generally. So how is the behaviour you're seeing now compared to a normal time?
I think that's so when we look at the purchase index, the question we're asking it there, if I just go back to it, is what people are purchasing more and what people are purchasing less. So I think what we're seeing is that there are certain items that people are, you know, we talked about China initially and also with the UK. So I think sorry, I've just seen, so I think what we're kind of seeing here is that people at different stages are sort of stocking up on different items. But what we see in the longer run is that certain items like personal hygiene and cleaning products are remaining high on people's lists as preventative measures. So I think this is quite interesting to see that when we consider what behaviour has changed, you know, personal hygiene products, cleaning products, long-lasting groceries may not have previously been bulk bought, and yet they are now. And similarly, what we're seeing is in what trends will continue. And I think there may be a shift from longer-lasting groceries as people may move back more to fresh, where they're sort of, you know, what we saw in China is that, you know, as a more holistic view to their well-being. So it's not just about sort of the immediate sort of panic buying anymore. It's like they're taking a more holistic view, and part of that holistic view is to be more cautious of their personal hygiene, is to keep their homes clean, but it's also to take better care of themselves. So I would sort of imagine those categories, at least in China, are continuing to stay high, as well as sort of something like medical supplies. But it'll be interesting to see how this continues in other markets. Specifically to food, if that was the question as well, what we initially saw at the start was not this picture. What we actually initially saw at the start was that some of these fresh items were actually going down, particularly meats. So fresh meat, dairy, eggs, I believe as well, actually dipped initially. And people were buying more of the rice, the pasta, the canned goods. And now, as sort of, I'm not saying life is returning back to normal, but as the shelves are a bit more stocked, as there are more restrictions, and the supermarkets, the government is now putting in place measures to actually try and prevent some of this stockpiling. We are seeing people returning to other products as well, like fresh produce again. And this is a similar picture we saw in China too. I think we're out of time, I'm afraid. But if there are any more questions, please do send them across, and we will try and we'll come back to you via email if we can, and we can also obviously share the webinar video with you too, so you can share it with other colleagues who may have missed the session. I guess I just want to say again, I know that everyone is extremely busy. So I wanted to thank you for making the time to join us today. And I just want to say again, please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay at home. Thank you very much.